All right, I am going to be more honest tonight than people are usually used to their pastors being, so fair warning, all right? But there's a reason for this, and the reason has to do with what I think we need to do next as a church. So, I was raised Christian, and not just by my parents. I was raised Christian by a community of people who built this whole church culture here in the United States that a lot of us have been a part of. And the version that I got of Christianity is the version of popular religion anywhere you go around the world, no matter what the religion is. The idea behind this popular religion is if you obey the rules, then God will bless you. And every different religion, has a different set of rules that we have to obey. But whether you're a Christian person or a Muslim person or a Jewish person or a Buddhist person, there are rules that you have to obey in order for God or the universe or whatever to bless you. And that's true even if you live in some kind of crazy hippie cult, right? There are things you do and things you don't do, and the things you do are supposed to give you the good life that you know that you want. And when you're young, that kind of spirituality affects you in two ways. The first way that it affects you is you have endless conversations with people about what the rules are exactly and how close you can get to breaking the rules without being disqualified, right? And so when I was growing up, me and my friends used to have endless conversations about how much alcohol we could drink without breaking the rule not to get drunk. And we used to talk about whether or not tobacco and marijuana and drugs counted because the Bible doesn't mention those things. And we talked about what kind of sex you could have without breaking the rules about premarital sex. And we asked the question, are there even rules about premarital sex because the Bible doesn't talk about it? And then what about tattoos? And what if it's a Christian tattoo? There's a Bible verse that says don't get tattoos, but what if I get a different Bible verse tattoo? Does that cancel out that Bible verse in Leviticus that says I should get a tattoo? And what kind of music can we listen to? And what kind of movies can we watch? And where can we go on Friday night to have the most fun but still feel like Christians when we go to church on Sunday morning? And those kind of conversations were Sunday school and youth camp and retreats. And when I went on mission trips and I talked to strangers in England, in a park in London, a girl walked up to me and she said, "You guys are missionaries from the United States?" And I said, "Yeah." I was 15. And she asked me a very strange question about whether or not her and her boyfriend could do a specific thing. And I was like, why in the world would you ask a 15-year-old American my opinion on this? But that is sort of the reputation and sort of the vibe that we give off as religious people, that we've got this set of rules that's just perfect, and if you follow those rules, you'll be blessed with a good life. And the first way that affects you is you have lots of conversations with each other about what those rules are and how close you can get to breaking them and still be in. The second way that affects you when you're young is when you make mistakes and you break the rules, what do? You work as hard as you can to try to hide those mistakes from other Christians, especially Christians in authority, especially your parents. And it never works for very long. You make a mistake, you break a rule, sooner or later they find out. And so then your whole spiritual life is basically trying to figure out what the rules are and trying to get as close to those rules as you possibly can without breaking them. And then hiding your mistakes as best as you can, and then feeling shame when you get caught, and then doing whatever act of penance you need to do to get everybody's approval again so that you can still be part of your spiritual community, so that you can appease your parents and appease your church or whatever. And the Bible in that scenario is just the book that we check to make sure that we haven't broken one of the rules in a way that was too bad this week. And we do it to check the behavior of other people to make sure that they're not breaking the rules in a way that would make us not able to associate with them or whatever. And I know that I said that that's how it works when you're young, but let's be honest. We've all been around religious people for long enough at this point to know that a lot of religious people never grow out of this cycle. And they're still stuck in this cycle as adults. And they're still trying to figure out what rules to obey and how to appease each other and how to hide their mistakes and how to ask for penance when they mess up. But it's all worth it, right? It's all worth it. Because if you obey the rules, then God will bless you and give you the kind of life that you want, and nothing bad will ever happen to you, right? And I hit my early 20s, having kept all the rules according to my personal understanding of those rules. I waited to smoke until I was 18. I waited to drink until I was 21. I only did legal drugs, and I made sure I didn't get addicted to them. I didn't get any tattoos, even Christian tattoos. I skipped the rock songs on the rock CDs that I had that said bad things about God. So that means, like, for AC/DC, you can listen to Back in Black, but you can't listen to Highway to Hell. It's very clear. You got to skip that one. At the movies, most of the time when there were naked people on the screen, I would look away until the scene was over. And I asked God to forgive me when I said cuss words. And I went on mission trips. And I went to Bible college. And I married a Christian girl at age 23. And then I applied for a job as a pastor. And I followed the rules. And then some. Because I committed my life to serving the Lord, right? And so at 23, I fully expected God to bless me. Because that was the deal. I kept the rules. I gave him what I thought he wanted. He owed me in return. And then when I was 23 years old, my life fell apart the way a train falls apart when it hits a brick wall in one of those old-timey movies. The government denied my wife's visa, and she couldn't come to the U.S. And so we spent the first year and a half of our marriage apart, and me getting on the bus at midnight and going all the way down to Chihuahua to visit her on the bus whenever I had enough money to go. But we also ran out of money within, 3 months of being married. And when I got an offer to work at a church on the U.S.-Mexico border, I had to take it because we didn't have any other way to support ourselves, and that means I had to leave her behind in Mexico until her paperwork got worked out. And then when I was a pastor, it was not at all like I imagined it would be. I landed right in the middle of a church that was splitting. I had to go to dozens of those terrible meetings where people shout at each other and they turn red and spit flies out of their mouth. And in that whole process, I made real enemies. People shouted at me and they spat on me. I'm not kidding. People spat on me. And I was miserable because there were people in my life that were actively trying to hurt me. And then on one of my trips into Mexico, my Jeep got stolen with my passport in it. And I had to come back across Mexico and cross the border without papers. And right before I got across the border into the United States, some less than friendly police officers made a circle around me, like you do to a kid on the playground, and they kicked me around for a little bit and took all my money. And then all of that stress activated a genetic autoimmune disease, and at age 25, I was in the hospital for my first surgery, and I was facing a long road of medical treatment that has continued to this day. And so I know I'm not going to win any suffering Olympics. There's a lot of people out there in the world that have had it way worse than me. But like any good religious person, this whole ordeal that I went through shook my faith because I obeyed the rules. And I went to church on Sunday. And I was a pastor with good intentions. So why would this happen to me? This was not the deal that I had been told that God makes with us. And that kind of resulted in a crisis of faith, if I'm honest. And during that crisis of faith, I met two kinds of people. I met people who were still invested very deeply in that rule-keeping game. They still believed that that was the deal. And for them, they had to figure out where I had gone wrong in order to deserve what happened to me. Because it just didn't fit in their heads that somebody could have bad things happen to them in a way that, or for reasons that weren't their fault. And these are people like Job's friend Eliphaz from Job chapter 4, verse 7, who tries to convince Job that Job had done some secret sin to deserve like the death of his children and the loss of all his livestock. And Eliphaz says, "Think now, who that was innocent ever perished? Or where were the upright cut off? As I have seen, those who plant iniquity and sow trouble reap the same." So Eliphaz is saying to Job, I've seen a lot of people suffering, but somewhere in their past, they did something that deserved that made them deserve what happened to them. Bad things don't just happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people, and sometimes people are good at hiding how bad they are, but God's fair. And God makes people suffer according to some kind of scale that only God can see, but you got to admit that we all deserve what happens to us. And I even had a doctor try to pull that on me. He found out I was a pastor after I got diagnosed with my disease, and he said, well, you got to admit, you've at some point in your life, you had to have done something wrong to deserve this, right? And I'm like, you're my doctor. I get enough of this from church people. Don't pull this on me. But then I also met lots of people like me whose lives had not worked out the way that they wanted them to. I met people with serious financial problems. I met people with legal problems. I met people with chronic and terminal diseases. I met people who had a history of childhood abuse. I met people who were part of broken marriages and strained relationships. I met people with different sexual identities. And I met people who had sick kids. And I met people with drug addictions. And I met people with broken dreams. And as I got to know these people, I realized that some of these people had kept the rules and some hadn't. And that means that God doesn't award suffering to people based on some kind of scale that makes sense. Which means that not all of our pain is actually our fault. And it means that suffering is unavoidable even if you do the right thing all the time. And it means that the idea that God blesses people if they keep the rules without fail is actually not the real deal. And one of the most painful things to see once I realized that was that there were still a lot of religious people who believed in the deal, and these people had no room in their hearts for people who were struggling. Because either our suffering is our own fault because we have some kind of secret sin, or our suffering is proof that they believe in a lie. And the whole system that they've built their spirituality on is wrong. And that means that either way, those of us who need the most help from a community of support and the most help from God are pushed away from our spiritual communities because we are a threat to the way that they understand the world. And I realized very painfully, because remember, I'm still a pastor at this point, I realized that our popular faith, the answer to life's problems that we sell, and all of its rule keeping, is not actually helping anybody. It makes self-righteous people more self-righteous. It pushes people away who are hurting. And the whole thing is built on a lie. Because in the end, following the rules is no guarantee that you are going to get what you want out of life. And here's the painfully honest part. Like a lot of people my age, I lost all faith in the church. I could see that all the things that church people say they care about, like creation versus evolution, and gay marriage, and abortion, and praying in schools, and only listening to Christian music, is just an attempt to enforce our rules onto each other so that God will bless us as a people. And I even started to doubt the existence of God. And this is while I was still a pastor. And here's why. Science has always just made sense to me. Okay? It's not my fault. It just kind of has always made sense to me. And then I looked at the evidence of my life and I compared it to what I was taught about faith growing up. And for a while, it was a lot easier to believe that I was the product of some cosmic accident instead of believing that there was some kind of Father God who cared about me watching out for my life, because the evidence in my life at that moment did not stack up to that. And so I felt bitterness, and I felt anger, and I felt resentment toward the whole universe. And that took root in my heart. Because nothing was what I was told that it was. And there was no deal to make with God that would get for me what I wanted and what I needed. And if there's no deal, then why would anyone believe in God in the first place or follow the rules? And when I looked around for answers, I saw nothing but misery everywhere I turned. I saw Christian people and people of all religions living lives of bitterness and anger and resentment and disappointment. And I saw my atheist friends struggling with the same attitudes of self-righteousness that they hate in religious people. And I saw people who did whatever they wanted and ignored the whole question. I saw those people drowning in an ocean of meaninglessness. And I saw people abusing each other, and I saw people being abused, and I saw suffering that made no sense. And I saw the whole human race taking out our frustrations on each other as hatred and violence and mockery. And tell me if that is not what we see on the news every night. And my heart broke. Because what I saw is the real world without any kind of religious delusion in the way to make it manageable. And I could finally see the mess that we're in. And I didn't know what to do. And that right there is where Jesus found me. Some people can point to like a single moment in their lives where they were standing in a beam of light and they heard God say their name from heaven. You know, John, you are my child. This is what I'd like you to do. I can't point to one of those moments, but I can point to a lot of little moments that have changed my life. One of the first ones was when the doctor handed me my daughter. And I looked at her, and she looked at me, and she started to cry. And I knew that this person needed me. And that softened me in a way that I was not expecting and in a way that I did not plan. And when they handed me my son, it was the same thing. And then watching my wife care for me when I was sick. And even watching my wife's parents. There was one year when I had just had surgery and my wife got the flu while she was caring for me. And we like couldn't even get up, either of us, to go to the kitchen to make food. And her parents got on a bus that night and traveled on a bus through Mexico all night and crossed the border and came up here to help us. And her mom like just swept the house and I remember she made meatballs, like meatball soup for us. And it was like an angel had come to save us from the hole that we were in. My parents have been there for us in really powerful ways as well. And I remember there was a table of free books somewhere where I was at, and I saw this old book that was all beat up, and I obviously can't skip a table of free books. And this book was called The Man from Nazareth by H.E. Fosdick, and it was about Jesus, but it was about Jesus the way that the people who first saw him would have understood him. And I started to read that, and a bunch of the stuff that I already knew about Jesus and that I'd read about Jesus in the Bible actually made sense to me for the first time in like a really practical way. And I felt like the person of Jesus Christ kind of popped out for me for the first time, and I felt like he was really there with me. And that was a pretty powerful experience. There were other books that I read during that time and classes that I was taking at school that really sort of brought Jesus to life for me. And then I started a practice of meditating every morning, and I'd go outside on our back porch and I'd pray and just be quiet and try to calm down and try to deal with my stress and try to listen to the birds and feel the sunshine and listen to the wind through the trees. And after a while, it didn't feel like I was alone anymore. It felt like somebody was there with me. And I was just doing that because I didn't know what else to do. And for some reason, God saw that and came close to me in that because he knew that I needed him. And over here in this building behind the church, I'd be working and things were going crazy and I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I'd go outside and I'd get my guitar and I'd play some songs and I'd sing some songs and I'd just cry. And we went on a trip to Chiapas down in central Mexico, or southern Mexico, Central America. And seeing people there living on this mountainside and growing corn and being able to build a village for them in the jungle and being around the people that I was around and other experiences I had like that with other Christians. I felt the presence of the Lord with me during all of those experiences, and I felt something in me start to heal. And each one of those moments was like a different face to the same diamond of truth. And the truth was, no, there's no deal that you can make with God where you just follow this set of rules and he'll give you everything that you want. And the world is definitely a mess, and I have done some things that were wrong, but also not all of my suffering is completely my fault. But the truth is that there still is goodness in the world, and life is still worth living if you can figure out how. And the only way to truly live is to embrace all of it, the beautiful and the heartbreak, and to love deeply, and to love selflessly, and to love humbly and truly, and to love everyone and to love everything in this whole messed up world. And the all-time best guide in all of history to that kind of love, the kind of love that actually makes life worth our time, the best guide to that kind of love is Jesus Christ. When you compare him to everybody else, within our own religion and outside of our religion, nobody even comes close. And when Jesus tells us in the Sermon on the Mount to be humble and to be meek and to be merciful and to be pure in heart, and when he tells us that God is our heavenly Father who knows what we need before we ask him, and when he tells us that we can trust God with our needs, and when he tells us to let go of all of our grudges and all of our bitterness and all of our anger and all of our hatred and all of our religious posturing, and when he tells us to love our enemies without judgment and to do for others as we would have them do for us, that Jesus, who tells us to live that kind of life, to work for a better and a more peaceful world, that Jesus does not say that from a place of innocence, like he doesn't know what's wrong with the world. It's Jesus who walked through the crowd and saw everybody's pain and everybody's suffering, who was betrayed by one of his friends and abandoned by the rest of his friends and tortured and nailed to a cross to die. That Jesus invites us to live a life of love and courage and strength and peace and to make something in this world that's worth our time. It's not someone who hasn't suffered. It's not someone who doesn't know what we're going through. It's not someone who can't see the mess that we're in. It's somebody who saw that mess better than anybody and who suffered the consequences of that mess more than most of us ever will. And that Jesus does not give us some new list of rules to follow so that we'll get everything that we want. That Jesus tells us that life is not going to go the way that we want it to go, but that we can still live a life worth living despite all of our pain and all of our suffering and the mess that we're in as a human species. And so Jesus' way does not teach us to avoid pain and loss by trying to do everything right. Jesus' way opens us up to a new kind of life by including our pain and our loss and our failure and our disappointment and teaching us to love anyway. And there was a moment, and I can't tell you when that moment was because I don't even know, but there was a moment when I knew that Jesus was inviting me to follow him and to put those teachings into practice for myself and to overcome my pain with love. And that was the moment when, to be honest, church culture and all of its rules and even the idea of what we're trying to do just dropped away and lost all importance for me. And that was the moment when I knew that I was bound to Jesus and his way and that he was calling me to a narrow path that leads to life that few find. And so what I did about 5 years ago was I started putting Jesus' teachings into practice in situations that were terrible because I didn't know what else to do. So I humbled myself before God and asked for help. I stopped trying to negotiate with him. I stopped trying to say, but look at all this stuff that I did right. This is what I deserve in return. I humbled myself and I said, God, I can't do this on my own. I need help. And I left it there. And then when my enemies came to attack me, that sounds so dramatic, but it's true. You could ask my wife. When my enemies came to attack me, I let God protect me instead of trying to defend myself. And I let people say all kinds of nonsense about me, and I let the situation work itself out. And when I did that, it actually worked itself out way better than I could have ever orchestrated on my own, because the people who hated me either became my friends or went away. And it was like, whoa, Jesus said this would happen, and it did. I've been a Christian for 30-some years, and I'm just now starting to put this stuff to the test. And when you do, it works. And then I started to let go of worry. And I got to tell you, that's not something that anybody gets completely in this life, because as soon as you figure out how to not worry about something, the Lord gives you something new to worry about, some new blessing that you have to protect. A lot of times they're children. But I've started to learn how to let go of worry and trust God for my future. And I started to treat people with love, especially the people who annoy me the most. And I took responsibility for my attitudes and my behavior and my relationships. And I tried to take the log out of my own eye before looking at the speck in the eyes of others. And I stopped trying to figure out the rules. And I started trying to figure out how to follow Jesus and how to love people. And I accepted that the world is messed up and that my life is not perfect and that I'm going to die. But I also accepted that my experience of life, the time that I have, the quality of it, and the quality of the lives of the people around me actually depends a lot on how humble and how loving I can be. And you know what? By putting all that stuff into practice, really poorly, right? I'm still a person as best as I can, but really poorly. I tried to put all that stuff into practice. I found out that Jesus' way actually works. I still suffer, I still struggle, I still fail. But following Jesus in the details of my life has actually transformed my attitude and my relationships and my understanding of myself. And I can truly say that I've had a little taste of a different kind of life. And it's the kind of life that bubbles up inside of you like a spring of living water, and that feels a lot like something that Jesus said that I hadn't understood before. And so from now on in my life, what I want is to turn that faucet wide open so that that is what flows out of me into the world around me. And what I want for us as a little spiritual family here is to figure out how each of us can enjoy that life and how we can share that life together. There is life in Jesus and in his way. And it's not the naive religious life of all the rules and the loopholes and the blessings. And it's not the hopeless life of doubt and cynicism. Jesus invites us to see the world clearly as it is, including all of our pain and all of our imperfections and all of our limitations and all of our frustrations and all of our failures, and to still somehow live a life that is full of faith and hope and love, that is something close to our human potential. There's a way to do it. And the way to do it is not to avoid all pain forever, because that's just not going to happen. But the way to do it is to embrace our pain and include it in our lives and ask God for help and support each other, and we can get there. Now, go to Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. Jesus says, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." I lived my life for a very long time on sand. And the storms that came along knocked my house down over and over and over again, and I got tired of it. And I know some of us are tired of it too, right? Some of us are tired of all these ups and downs in life that shake us to our core and make us doubt the love of God and the meaning and the purpose of this life that we're living. I'm tired of that. I'm tired of seeing that in other people. I know some of us are tired of that, and I'm tired of our spiritual community, our church, our family being built on sand. And Jesus says that the key to building a strong foundation for our spiritual house that will keep us standing and keep us solid despite all the stuff that we know is going to happen to us is to hear his words and to do them. Hear his words and do them. Whatever we do in the coming months, we're going to make some changes to how this whole Saturday night thing works. We're going to make some changes to what we do when we're together. There's going to be changes to form, changes to content, changes to the whole thing. But I want us to know, starting now, that the changes we make are so that we can build our spiritual house on the rock, the solid rock of Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount. And I want us to know, starting now, that those of us who have put this into practice imperfectly and with a lot of failure and with a lot of struggle and with a lot of tears, but those of us who have put his teaching and his way of life into practice can tell you that it helps and life gets better. And there's something in your life right now that you are struggling with that Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount can help you with. And there will be struggles and new challenges that are coming for you in your life in the future that if we train in Jesus' way, we will be able to handle those challenges much better than we can handle them right now. And so we are going to be the people who hear Jesus' words and who do them. Because this is a life or death game that we're playing. And I'm tired of losing when Jesus says that we can win.